Hello, and welcome to another edition of Everybody Hates Your Brand, the podcast for all things marketing and customer experience. In this episode, we talk to Paul Trueman, copywriter, creative, communication consultant, and the boss of Words, Ideas, and Plans. We talk about two fascinating areas, creativity and the life of a freelancer. So, if you've ever wanted to know how to write a great brief, feedback on creative ideas, or whether freelancing is for you, this podcast has you covered. So today is a first for the podcast. After 30-something episodes, we finally have a quote-unquote creative person on. And more than that, a man who sits at an intersection between two areas of interest, one being creativity and the other being the world of freelance and freelancing. And we live in an era of the Great Resignation and people going off to do their own thing and a huge amount of change in the job market. So I would like to welcome to the podcast, Paul Trueman. Welcome, sir.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely no problem. Delightful to have you, sir. So, as always, tradition here in this neighbourhood is to do what we call the credibility section, which is the bit up front, which you talk about your background and your skills and what you've done and your career and all that kind of stuff to give people listening a sense of who you are and the expertise and the experience you bring to the conversation. So, if you wouldn't mind giving us a quick summary of your background and your career, please.
Sure. First of all, just want to say how pleased I am that your excellent podcast has finally got round to recognising who adds the real value to the bottom line here.
It's all about data, Paul.
All these very high-powered, incredibly clever people have listened to you on your podcast, blinding me with all sorts of science and insight. And really what you need is someone who's good with puns.
It's the ingredient that's been missing all this time.
Exactly. Yeah, jokes. So I'm a copywriter and a communications consultant, and I live and work for the most part in North Devon. And I work with clients in the UK and Europe to help them get the most bang for buck for their brand communications. Because obviously, as you know, and as you've talked about very succinctly and very wisely on this podcast, done properly, a brand basically makes you more valuable. A good brand adds to your bottom line. So, I'm really lucky. I work with some big global brands. I work with some amazing low budget not-for-profits to keep me honest. And my job is basically help them communicate what they do in ways that make them stand out. It really is as simple as that. And, you can dress it up in all sorts of highfalutin ways, but really I help them think about what they're saying, who they're saying it to, how they're saying it. That includes everything from sort of podcasts to websites to DM campaigns to print ads to TVCs. And the reason I kind of talk about being a comms consultant and a copywriter is that because I'm freelance and I've got, lucky enough to have kind of a raft of clients, I work with them all in different ways. Mm-hmm. So, and it's because part of that reason is because my background is quite sort of varied. I didn't come to copywriting in the normal sense.
Cool. And it is an interesting background, and you've worked agency side and you've worked client side and you've done all sorts of fun stuff in your career. Creative's an interesting world because there's a kind of paradox in it, which is that a lot of people are scared by creative people or creative people are kind of put on a pedestal almost. It's like in most agencies I've worked at, the creatives are like, like Halo, light shines, all that kind of stuff. Doves emerge, and there are the creatives churning out the work. They're quite scary people to talk to in some ways. Yet perversely, every client I've ever worked for and at, everyone thinks they know how to write copy and everyone thinks they know what a good advert looks like. So there's this weird dichotomy between the two worlds. And so having somebody on like you to help, especially I think client marketers sort of navigate the world of working with creatives, I think is going to be really, really valuable. So we'll start with the kind of creative bit first, and then we'll jump into your freelance life and navigating those waters in a bit. One of the things that always is drilled into you whenever you work in an advertising agency is the brief is paramount. The brief is everything. even down to like the one line creative proposition is everything. And what's interesting is that there's a big discrepancy between whether marketers think they're good at writing briefs and the agencies who receive them thinking those briefs are any good or not. The betterbriefs.com state that 80% of marketers agree that they consider themselves good at writing briefs. Only 10% of creative agencies agree that those same people are good at writing briefs. So first question for you is that something you recognize? And if so, what are the sort of biggest pitfalls you see when you're receiving briefs? What is it that makes a great brief?
Yeah, sure. So I definitely recognize those numbers. And I think it comes down to the immutable truth, which is that no one thinks a bad brief or the resulting bad creative work is their fault. No one is ever going to put their hand up and go, yeah, you know what, we did a bad job on this. We're always, you're always going to blame the brief. That phrase, if I'd had longer, this would have been shorter.
Yeah, I've never heard that. That's good.
No, it's a writing thing. If I'd worked on it harder, it would have been shorter. Briefs are a bit like that. Like a good brief is a bit like a diamond, right? So a huge amount of pressure and time has gone into it. And if it has, then you get something remarkably valuable out of reading it. But we don't always have, do we, a huge amount of pressure?
No, we do not.
We certainly don't have a huge amount of time. So often that isn't what comes out. A diamond doesn't come out of the other end. And similarly, if you're a concept creative, which I have been in my career, so you're a kind of, in the awful agency jargon, you're like a midweight or you're a heavyweight creative. You're paid to come up with ideas that add value to a bottom line of a brand. You are basically paid for your ability on a daily basis to generate ideas and then execute them. Right now, I love what I do and I love my profession and I'm proud to do it. But very few of us are ever going to say, you know what, this is an absolutely great brief and I've got absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
You're just not going to do it. You're just not going to do it because it's too frightening. It's too frightening. It messes with your head. As a creative, you're basically playing this confidence trick on yourself all the time, which is that I can always generate ideas and there are always more ideas, which I believe. It's a phrase I believe and it's true. But creativity is a fascinating subject. And the more you think about it, the scarier it gets. And I do think that creatives are always looking for a reason why that idea possibly wasn't as good as it could have been. And it's never going to be that it's them.
Yeah.
It's never going to be that it's them.
Okay, because if they admit that it might happen again and that maybe the well will run dry and that is, Yeah,
and actually saying that out loud is quite a scary thing because it's like, because creativity is such a, there is no formula for it. There are definitely practices for it, and it's a really interesting subject. But it's almost like, are you messing with your own head to say, "Oh, I haven't been able to come up with anything"? So that's one reason. I think, let's face it, far too many briefs get written far too quickly, or worse, they get repeated because it's the same client and it's a different variation on a theme, and so the brief is basically the same. You get or they've thrown the kitchen sink in there in an attempt to cover it. So they've given you all the research rather than like we're saying, rather than put the time in to kind of extract the good stuff.
Yeah, distill it down themselves. Yeah.
See appendices 2 through to kind of 12. And there's also that thing of like, what if you're an agency and you've won a client and you're in a really good relationship with them, a regular, and you're on a retainer, those kind of incredibly rare things nowadays, but you're not working on a project, but it's a regular thing. It's a regular gig. It's very common to get the same brief over and over and over again because it's been written by probably an account manager or possibly even an account exec late at night, the night before. And they're like, oh my God, I've got to get this guy, got to get hold of this person the next morning. Yeah. And they've done a bit of a, there's a little bit of that going on.
Yeah. Would it, in your opinion, does the level of detail required, I'm assuming it does, vary in terms of the medium that's being produced at the end? So if you're being asked to produce a blog post or you're being asked to produce an email or something along those lines that is more copy, essentially,
Mm.
Do you anticipate a slightly more detailed brief in those regards, for example?
It's tricky, isn't it?
Mm.
Sort of a really good brief. It doesn't. It's not so much that it isn't really whether it's short or long. It's just what it's got inside it. So ideally, you want some kind of genuine insight into the thing you're about to write about, or have ideas about, or design, or whatever.
Yeah.
And real insight isn't something that everyone in an agency or anywhere has or knows how to get. And what it really needs is a good planner to have touched it and looked at it and interrogated it. And if that's happened, then it doesn't really matter whether it's short or long or whatever. If it's given you some genuine insight into the thing that you're about to have to do, that's what you're there for. Gotcha. Some kind of like, like some little turning of the lock, basically.
When I was in Australia, I worked for my creative ECD was a guy called Scott Smith. He was a lovely, genuinely lovely man. And I knew I'd like him because his ringtone was TNT by AC/DC. And I thought, you're a good dude. And he taught me about writing creative propositions and all that sort of stuff. I'm not good at them, but at least he helped me. And he said it was that. It's just a spark. It's something that leads you. It's the first step almost. And then the creative kind of goes, oh, okay, I can see where that's going to disappear off to, or I've got ideas of the ways I could take that kind of creative spark, which leads me to an interesting question about, I'm kind of skipping ahead in some of the questions we talked about, a couple here, but every brief I've ever written, and it's a bit I always probably badly ignore, there's always a tone of voice. What's a tone of voice? And inevitably, it's a list of just what seems to me to be random words. So you end up being something like, it's jargon-free, human, and open. What the fuck does that mean? So my question to you is, when you see something like, what do you want to see in a tone of voice guideline?
This is such a good question. So in my experience, 9 times out of 10, tone of voice guidelines are like they're like the nuclear rods from a.
I've got to know where this is going. Okay.
they're like the nuclear material from a decommissioned nuclear facility. Right. In that they basically they come out, they get lined in concrete and then sunk to the bottom of the sea and never ever talked about again. So they're there too often. Basically, it's like the 80-20 rule. I would say 80% of tone of voice guidelines are just a complete waste of everyone's time. They're there for cover. So from the CMO or whoever, so that if someone complains about the communications going out, they go, well, I'll refer you to, paragraph 10 of our tone of voice guidelines that you signed off 2 years ago. I mean, I'm being a bit facetious, but
oh no, I've seen it happen. But yeah,
exactly. The really good ones belong to brands who, amazingly, and are these two things linked, know what they're doing. Yeah. So, and realistically, there's nothing less helpful than like you said, some of the platitudes you see in them. I think realistically, the most useful, the most helpful ones are the ones that that show you. They don't tell you. So they don't tell you that you're a funny brand. They make you laugh, right? So if you're a funny brand, if you're Foster's Lager from like 5 years ago, then you show me the ads that make me laugh, and show me the copy, the website copy, show me the social media, and put loads of examples. But those things are really hard because then you're basically spending creative time on that stuff. It's much easier to kind of reel off a list of adjectives, and then go do that.
Sometimes which are contradictory. I've seen that happen before. Yeah,
exactly. And there is, on really bad tone of voice guidelines, of which there are a lot. And it is occasionally. I'm not gonna, and I say this as someone who's very fond of agencies, but there is a certain extent to which you do sometimes think this has been put together to charge the client quite a lot of money. Now, I say this, I don't work for an agency anymore, and I work freelance, and I'm sure that everyone listening to this has no idea what I'm talking about.
No.
Do you occasionally look at them and think, this costs how much?
Yeah. That's fair. That's fair.
But that said, I would totally recommend that you have some. I just don't think they need to be as long or as gassy or as round the sort of the houses as they are.
Yeah.
That's all. I don't think you need as much. I think that you need basically more examples of what you're talking about, because that's what, as a copywriter or as a creative looking at it, you go, oh, okay, this is what these guys are about. I can do this.
Gotcha. So let's say in the process, brief has gone in to you and you have worked your magic and you're presenting creative concepts back. What's your, especially from a copy perspective, one of the things I know I am guilty of when I feedback copy, because I can't think of another way of doing it, although that might be a lazy excuse, I'm not sure, is if somebody writes something, I'm like, I'm not sure that's what I was after, something more like this. And I write something, which I'm pretty sure I shouldn't be doing. I know I shouldn't be doing, and I apologize to any copywriter. No. Not like the line or any of that, but like a sentence or that's not quite what I meant. But I don't know how else to articulate it unless I write it. So the question I guess to you is, what would be your advice when you're giving feedback or clients are giving feedback to you on copy and creative? Like, how do you get the most out of that conversation?
So I think what you've touched on is a really, really interesting, because, and I think you could hear it in the way you just phrased that then, but that kind of deference towards creatives, like when you said, I shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
And for me, the best relationships I've ever had with clients, whether at agency or freelance, are when it's collaborative. So that's not the same thing as saying, "Hey, Rob, you write the tagline, and I'll do your job," which that would end well on anyone's list of things. But like that conversation beforehand, and maybe even like just workshopping just a conversation. Yeah. So and we can come on to this later, but like some of the best agency client relationships I've ever had have been with smart clients who knew their subject inside out, who knew their brand inside out, and we would sit in a room and basically knock ideas around. And it wasn't, so it gets you away a little bit from that idea of, what you call the ta-da moment. You haul off the dust sheets off your miraculous piece of creativity that's been, kind of jealously guarded for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and you unveil it. Yeah. And then client, you get that horrible feeling where you just think, like, how has this happened?
Yeah. We missed quite a long way.
Yeah, exactly. And just that thing of that sort of, I think, that idea that basically creatives that are over there on that mountain, on the creative mountain, like coming up with the ideas. So that's the first thing I would say, is that I think it would be really useful to have a client when they say, look, I've got some ideas. Like, can we talk? That's not what I want to do, but I want to give you an idea of what I'm after. It's a little bit like tone of voice guidelines, right? That's it's a similar thing. It's like, here's kind of what it should sound like. Now, obviously, sometimes you'll be coming in as an agency and your job is to decide what it sounds like. So you'll have to you go and do that separately. But there is nothing worse than that kind of like deference to creatives, I think, because we're not like 8 years old and you end up feeling like a little kid. That's what I used to feel like. It was like, just tell me what you don't like. I'm fine. I'm not going to cry. This is just a job.
I suppose it's more about, in the sense of the deference is an interesting word. To me, it's more about, if I was working with a data scientist, I know a little bit, I don't know, stats A level, from back in the day and all that sort of stuff. I know a little bit about statistics, but I wouldn't sit down and say, oh no, I think I want it to be this graph and I want it to be this and I want it to be that and the other. I would give them the question and let them answer it. And so in the same way, I'm from the creative perspective, I wouldn't say I want it to be this, this, and this, but I also want to be able to give direction. And that's it's the kind of bit that we're giving, respecting your craft and your skill, but also trying to get your message across, which I think is where it can get a bit difficult.
No, that makes total sense. I think, like I said, it comes down to the right way to collaborate, doesn't it? Yes. And the right way, and it should feel like a mutual exchange. It shouldn't. I think like I said, I can only go on like my own experience, and the best experiences I have are when it's a collaborative thing. It's not when I take the brief, never talk to them again, and then come back, and then ta-da, do the ta-da, and just hope to God that I've got it right. I mean, I think, there's a whole world of difference, isn't there, between saying to a creative, here's the kind of thing I really want to get out of this, versus saying, here's what I think this should sound like.
Yeah. And it's just making sure you don't tip over into the latter of those two things, I think, is a...
Yeah, exactly. It comes back to that thing of, that you ask any copywriter what the worst sentence to hear is, and it will be a client who approaches them for some work, and they'll say, up front, this isn't going to take you very long. That is the worst thing you can ever hear. Well, possibly not the worst, but it's up there with it. Just, I can feel the hackles go up. It's like
shows an absolute lack of respect for what and how difficult it is to write. How easy it is to write mediocre copy, but how difficult it is to write or creative, and how difficult it is to create really, really good copy. When I went to the IDM, I was taught by creative by a guy, Drayton Bird. He was like an legendary old creative, and he said he would write and then leave it, and then come back to it and edit it and write, and he would do that like a million times, until he got it as honed as he possibly could. And I'm assuming there's a similar process for you, and it's and which doesn't get applied to the brief, which is what we talked about earlier. But that process is not an easy thing to be able to do.
No, and that actually makes me laugh, because I have had moments, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's done this, where I've looked at copy from a client and gone, well, that could be tighter or whatever, and they've gone, yeah, you wrote that 3 months ago. Like,
yes, but here, yes.
Because, interesting. Like you said, you need a lot of time, and you don't always have time, and clients don't always want to give you time because they don't have it, right? It's not like they're not giving you artificial deadlines because they want to. They're just doing it because that's how they work. I'll tell you about the worst ever pitch experience I ever had as a copywriter and as creative. We sat down. It's one of the worst pitch experiences. What I love about pitching is that it's such a roller coaster, and it can be the worst thing, and it can be the best thing.
Yeah.
And often it can be both of those things in the same pitch. And we went to see a large accountancy firm here in the Southwest, all across the Southwest. And I got on really well with them. And I was there with my art director sort of partner on this job. And we got some really good stuff to show them. And I was feeling really good about it. And we sat down, and the account person who was looking after, our contact, started, basically had made a big deal before we walked in and said, you're going to be pitching to the partners and the senior partner, the Uber partner today. And so just to warn you, it can be a bit abrasive and all the rest of it. I was like, no, that's fine. And so our client starts explaining to these head honchos, who are all partners in accountancy. None of them have any creative experience, but they're all going to decide what happens. She starts explaining who we are and why we're there, which was slightly terrifying, because you suddenly realize they don't actually know why they're in this meeting. They're like the Prime Minister. They've just walked into another room where someone is going to tell them what they're there for. And he said, he looked at her and he looked at us, and they looked at her again. And without looking at us, he said the words, I don't understand. This is what we pay the guys in Thailand for. And what he was referring to was the overnight kind of creative service that they paid guys in Thailand for a figure. Not that we're expensive, but we were considerably more expensive than the guys in Thailand.
Right.
And I just remember my whole stomach kind of going, like I'd been punched. And so she was some umming and ahhing, and but I think if you remember, we agreed that Paul and Rob would come in and show you what they've done, and so he then sort of like politeness kicked in, and he kind of clearly thought, I don't want to look like a complete dick about this, so he's like, no, it's fine, of course, by all means, show us what you've done. And that was the beginning. That was the beginning of the pitch. And it was absolutely horrendous. However, we then showed him what we'd done.
Yeah.
And he loved it. And then 45 minutes later, we got him in the palm of our hand. And it ended up being a really good relationship for a while. And he also said the line to me the next time we went to see him, by which point we were all best friends.
Yes.
He said, "You know what, Paul?" He said, "Usually everyone in this building," so by which he meant all the partners, everyone in this building usually hates our adverts. But you know what? Not a single person has complained to me about these ads yet."
I mean, the absence of complaints is a measure of creative. That's lovely.
That was genuinely the highest praise that he could give me. It's like, no one hates it.
I like that. I mean, look, it's better than the opposite, I suppose. Okay, so we've talked about creativity, and I think one of the things, there's kind of a transition question here between the creativity and the freelance thing, which is, as a freelancer, if you get a brief, so you haven't got the air cover of an agency, you have a direct relationship with these people. If you get a brief or a piece of copy or a comment or something you don't agree with, how do you feedback? I mean, obviously, I'm assuming it comes back to that collaborative piece again. So you shouldn't necessarily, if that goes well, get something that you kind of go, I wasn't expecting that. It doesn't make any sense to me. But how do you feedback? And is it different being a freelancer than it is being a paid employee of an agency?
It's a really good question because, it's completely different. It's totally different because in an agency you're costed. As a creative, you've got a barrier between you and the client. Now, we can get on to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I have mixed feelings about it. There have been times in my life where I've really, really wanted a direct line to the client in a good way. I don't mean to rant and rave at them, but you don't get that, right? And that whole kind of you're not talking to the client, you're talking to me, and then I'm going to pass what you say to them. So it's completely different. It's your client, and you have to be really conscious of that. And so that is a very different situation. I'd say that the thing is, you can't be precious about this stuff, and I think this goes back to kind of the bit at the beginning, in terms of like my background. My background is, we didn't really get into this, but was client side for a while, and I know what it's like to be dealing with a grumpy creative. I'm using those sort of like air quotes there, grumpy creative who thinks they know your company or your brand better than you do. Now, I think they've definitely got things to give you, but I think you've just got to approach it in a sensible way. I will push back to clients when I think they're being overly cautious, or whether I think they're, the classic, we want to be brave. Show me something brave. Show me something new. You try and do that, and they say to you, not like that.
Something new and completely different, but is exactly like we used to do it.
Exactly. We all know what I'm talking about. So, and that's fine. Ultimately, I would say I am not James Joyce, right? This is not Ulysses. It is your money. It is your brand. I will ultimately do whatever you want. I will give you advice. I will push back nicely, and then we will agree to disagree or agree to agree. It's not the end of the world. I think you have to be confident if you're going to add value as a creative or as a consultant. You have to be confident enough to push back when you think you have an insight that isn't being used. Whether you have an insight about the copy or the design, and then what I would say there is it's 100% your duty to push back. It is much better to do that for your relationship, to do that over the phone or face to face on a call or in the same room. What gets tricky is when you're getting comments on a Google Doc, for example, or you're getting and that's when it can get that's when, for all sorts of reasons, it can get you really get down in the weeds, and tone can be taken the wrong way, and all the rest of it. Pick up the phone, talk to them, and start with the words, look, I'll do whatever you want, but here's what I think. Here's what you're paying me for. If you think I'm wrong, which is entirely possible, then let's do it your way. I'm just telling you I'm just giving you a second opinion, basically.
Yeah. We used to do at DDB, we used to do a thing where it was like, here's the thing that answers the brief. Here's the thing we think you should do. Was the kind of way we, not for everything, but for a bigger project, we kind of go, okay, this is the thing that we think is in your wheelhouse. There is a danger inherent in that, though, which is by presenting that safe course, you're giving them an option. So you have to kind of, how you present that is a question, but I think it's an interesting one.
That's so true, though, isn't it? Because you have to be prepared ultimately that that whole, we'll give them 3 routes.
Yeah.
One of them will be rubbish. Yeah. And the whole estate agent will show them 3 houses. One of them will be. You have to be, no agency should show anyone anything they're not prepared to.
I think it's not necessarily bad. I think it's more in keeping with what they'll like, I suppose, is a better way of putting it. Yeah. But yeah. Well, I think it's time we moved on to probably the second half of the conversation, or the second section of the conversation, which is about freelancing. We've already touched on it a little bit, but it's, the last 2 years have been fucking bizarre, and the world continues to get more and more bizarre as we go along. But one of the things that I think that is interesting is that people are reassessing their jobs and they're reassessing their careers, and then making decisions about moving on, leaving, and doing all sorts of different things. And there's a survey by the freelance platform Upwork last August that found 20% of current employees, that's 10 million people, I think it was, I want to say the US, but I could be wrong, are considering doing freelance work. Now, you made the leap before the world went to hell in a handbasket. What was it that made you do it? What was the catalyst?
So I've been working for my agency down here in North Devon for 7 years. So they're freelancer, a full service agency, sort of a slight sort of miracle almost of agency, in that they've been here for sort of more than 4 decades, and like I said, they're a full service agency, so you get to do everything there. And I had 7 really good years there, and I absolutely loved it. I think it was a little bit of 7-year itch, if I'm completely honest. I'd never worked anywhere longer than 5 years before I worked at Braylano. So 7 years felt extraordinary. Because it's North Devon, you could easily spend your whole life there. And I just looked at it and I thought, I'm not sure that's going to keep the juices flowing. Do you know what I mean? I'm just not sure I'm cut out for like 20 years somewhere. And I really loved my client relationships that I had with 1 or 2, really big brands. So I did a lot of work with Tefal, did a lot of their stuff. We did all sorts of digital and social work for them, which was really fun. And we had a great relationship with the guys there. Bash, if you're listening to this, call me. And we would basically get together. They were really smart people. And we would get together and knock ideas together. And it was fantastic. And I think I got to a point where I knew I really enjoyed that, and I knew I really enjoyed delivering creative for people. And there was an element to which I thought, like, I would get frustrated by the idea that I didn't own that relationship. That's not the same thing as saying I wanted to be in account management, but it was more just that thing where I wasn't in control of my time, because you're not, right? You're a resource. So you get hired out to do whatever you're asked to do, and that's totally fine. But I think possibly the sort of the protocols of an agency were just chafing on me a bit. And like I said, it was a brilliant fit for me for 7 years, but I think I just wanted that bit more control over what I worked on.
Gotcha.
And also there's also that element where you get to a certain point where you're like, do I want to become increasingly senior? Like I was running we had a really great creative social media team that I ran. They were brilliant. And I spent a lot of my time managing those guys, which I really loved. But that inevitably meant I did less time doing creative work.
It's the management trap, isn't it? You get promoted for being good at your discipline, and then the further up you go, the less you do the thing that you got promoted for.
Yeah, exactly. Do you want to manage the people doing the thing, or do you want to do the thing? And it was also just that thing of like, if I don't do it now, when will I ever do it? And I'd lived in London for 12 years. We'd moved down to North Devon. That had felt like a terrifying leap. There were lots of things that felt scary, and I just learned that lesson that ultimately, if you're not a little bit scared by the next step, it's probably not the right next step. And I certainly didn't feel scared by staying there, whereas I felt mildly terrified by the prospect of leaving.
It's good advice, though. It's advice my dad gives me. If you're going to take the next job should scare you.
Yeah.
Not like
Yeah. It's the,
petrifying fear, but it should be a little bit of a frisson where it's like, I'm okay, I'm not sure.
yeah.
Fingers crossed, but absolutely, I agree.
It's the great David Bowie quote about like the side of the nothing ever good happened at the side of the swimming pool. You have to kind of go just deep enough so that you can't stand up, and that's where the fun stuff is.
So, if somebody listening to this podcast is thinking about it, and I'm sure there are some people who are thinking about going into freelance, do you have any advice? Are there any do's and don'ts? Anything that you really wish you hadn't done, or wish you had done sooner? Anything like that?
If there was a narrator's voice here, it would step in to say, Paul has still not created a website for his business.
It would be Stephen Fry narrating as well. I think we would all agree.
It would be. That would be good. I would like that. So be better at doing things like a website for your business than I am. I 4 years and I still haven't got around to that. No. So there's a great phrase about going into freelance and the kind of why you should do it and what you should be wary of. I can't remember who said it, but it's something like always be running towards things that you want to do rather than running away from things. So are you going freelance to get away from things? Is it an exit from something? Yeah. Or is freelancing actually really what you want to do? Because it could be that it's just a way out of the situation that you're in. And I tend to find that, I think people tend to find that if you're going towards something, that's a much better reason to do it. So if freelance is this kind of thing that you are grasping for, then I go for it. You'll get total control over your time and work. That will bring its own challenges. You have to do everything. I know this is stating the bleeding obvious, but I remember, even though I knew that, there was a moment in my first few weeks where, I just suddenly thought, oh, I have to do that meeting. I have to arrange that meeting. I am now the account handler and the creative.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds ridiculous, but I really think that being a creative in an agency is an amazing job, right? Someone pays you to have ideas. I mean, it's not exactly down the coal mines, is it? I mean, it's not a proper job, and I mean that in the best way. It's not a proper job. It's brilliant. And like you said earlier, you get all this ludicrous kind of deference towards you as though you're doing this, this sort of slightly black magic. So be careful what you wish for, because that whole total freedom comes with, extra work, basically.
At least you don't have to do timesheets.
No.
Which are the devil's work.
No, you don't. That is true. And they are the worst thing ever. You have to bill.
Horrendous. Yes, that's true. And you've got to chase invoices and all that sort of stuff. Which leads me to my last question. In your having become freelance, you talked about, with the exception, obviously, of web design, which is clearly a skill you need to develop. I have a proper job, if you like. I have an employee, and I have a website. So if I can do it, Paul, you can do it.
I know.
What are the skills you've had to learn that aren't creative in those? You talk about time management a little bit, but like networking, self-promotion. Like, what is there anything that you've had to do or skills you developed that you didn't think you had before, or
I think basically the skills that I've got have almost enabled me to not address some of the things like get a website together, for example.
Yeah.
So I talk a lot about creative that I love, and I talk about communications and all the rest of it alongside everything else on Twitter, for example. If you'd like to follow me, I'm at Paul W. Trueman.
We'll put the Twitter handle in the podcast notes.
Yeah, you will be confronted with lots more besides, for which I apologise in advance. But a lot of my work is people coming to me because I've made a relationship with them or a link with them on social media or on some other platform where I've just been kind of geeking out about stuff that I'm really interested in that chimes with them. So I mean, I'm not great at the whole money time management thing, if I'm completely honest with you, but I'm okay as self-employed. I think it makes you, when one of the incredible challenges of being freelance is how you handle drought and
Abundance.
bonanza.
Yes.
It's abundance, exactly. Yeah. How and what I've learned about handling drought, which hasn't happened very often, but it has happened occasionally, is that you just have to kind of keep betting on yourself and try and, all the cliches are true. Don't panic. Try and enjoy, if you possibly can, that little bit of spare time that you might have.
Yeah.
As difficult as nay impossible as that is, but then when you're super busy, don't take on more work than you can handle it. And I know that sounds like the obvious, but it's so, if you've just had a period, for example, where you weren't working, it's incredibly difficult to say no to stuff. So I think you had a guest on recently, and they were saying something I totally agreed with, which is just that thing of have a network of people that you friends and that you trust, that you can hand work to, because ultimately you can't do everything, and I think what it's made, and occasionally someone will say to me, well, why don't you start your own agency? Why don't you, when I'm having a very busy couple of months and I'm bemoaning maybe over a pint in the pub and I'm saying, I don't know what to do with all this work. They'll say to me, why don't you start an agency? And it's like, well, that's not really in my skill set.
It's also kind of what you were getting away from, which was you wanted to do the work, not manage the people and all that stuff, right?
A little bit. I mean, agencies are very passé now, aren't they? I'm being tongue in cheek, but nowadays it's all about collectives, and no one wants to say it's an agency because they're worried that it will sound expensive. So they'll say things like, "We've got a collective. We'll tap you into it." So it's all very loose and kind of, I know people, we can make a thing together. But so I suppose that like what I'm trying to say in a very long-winded way is that the skills I've maybe learned are more a clarification of what I want to do versus what I know what I don't want to do.
Yeah.
And the stuff that I'm not so good at, for example, like I haven't got a website yet, is countered by the stuff that I'm good at, which is that I will. Instead of a website where I'll put some case studies on, I'll talk about stuff on Twitter, and people will occasionally approach me and say, you seem to know what you're talking about. Can we have a conversation about a thing, a challenge we've got in our business? So kind of things count. You don't have to be good at everything is what I'm trying to say.
Fair enough. Well, look, that has been a fabulous conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you very much for coming on. We will put your website in the show notes, but that's a moot point, isn't it? We'll put your Twitter handle in the podcast notes so anybody listening can follow you. And I follow Paul, and it's always a fun time. So thank you very much for spending the time to come on and chat to me. It's been very kind of you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, hopefully you agree that was another enlightening interview. I always enjoyed doing them, but that one was certainly a favourite of mine. I hope you'll join us next time. And until then, take great care and be vigilant.